I was spooning my GF when her mom texted me, "I can't stop thinking about you. You looked so good tonight." I instantly flipped over Ronalda and showed her my phone. "Why the freak would your mom text me this?" She stared at me blankly. "What? Text you asking about your favorite soda?" I looked back at my screen and that's when I saw it. Her mom had already deleted the text. Ronalda touched my forehead like she was checking for a fever, her eyes all concerned. "Babe, are you feeling okay? You look pale." The thing was, I knew what I saw. Those words were burned into my brain. "Can't stop thinking about you." Before I could explain again, her mom walked into the apartment with her spare key, carrying groceries like this was completely normal. "Oh good, you're both here. I got those steaks for the weekend barbecue." She smiled at me the exact same way she always did, like somebody's sweet suburban mom, not someone who just sent me that message 10 seconds ago. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept seeing those words. Maybe I was stressed from work, but 2 days later at the family BBQ, things got so much worse. I was flipping burgers when Ronalda's mom cornered me in the kitchen, supposedly looking for more sauce. She leaned in close, way too close, and whispered, "You look really good in that shirt," while literally rubbing my arm. My whole body went rigid. But the second Ronalda walked in, her mom smoothly pivoted mid-sentence. "Was just telling him about your father's new golf clubs. Isn't that exciting, honey?" I tried to catch Ronalda's eye, to somehow communicate what just happened, but she was already chatting about how dad never shuts up about golf. That night I knew I had to get proof. So when her mom called me the next day about borrowing a ladder, I recorded the entire conversation on my laptop. She said things, weird things, about how strong I looked, how she thinks about me during yoga class. When I went to play it for Ronalda, my phone said storage full, which was impossible because I had 50 gigabytes free that morning. Then came the text about measurements. "What's your chest size?" An inseam. I practically threw my phone at Ronalda. She just laughed. "She makes everyone quilts for Christmas, babe. She's super particular about sizing." But I knew something was seriously wrong at family dinner that Thursday. I felt something sliding up my leg under the table and realized her mom was playing footsie with me. I jumped up so fast I knocked over my water glass. Everyone stared. "You good, bro?" Ronalda's brother pulled me aside later. "Mom mentioned you've been acting weird around her lately. Everything okay at work?" The paranoia was eating me alive. I started documenting everything in a notebook. Dates, times, exact quotes. When Ronalda found it, she held an actual intervention with her therapist cousin. They sat me down in the living room like I was on trial. "We're worried about you," Ronalda said, holding my hand. "Mom says you've been jumpy and paranoid. My dad thinks you might be having stress-induced episodes." I wanted to scream. The next week, her mom texted, "Meet me tonight," with a hotel address. This was it. Concrete proof. I screenshotted it immediately and ran to show Ronalda. My phone died instantly. Completely black screen. Wouldn't turn on. When I got it back from the repair shop 2 days later, they said they recovered everything. But those screenshots? They didn't exist in any cloud backup, any folder, anywhere. By week 3, I was losing my mind. Every family member acted like I was the crazy one. Her dad kept asking if I needed someone to talk to. Her sister suggested meditation apps. Even Ronalda started leaving pamphlets about anxiety disorders on my nightstand. I couldn't take it anymore. At Sunday family dinner, when her mom asked me to pass the salt and deliberately brushed her fingers against mine while winking, something inside me snapped. I stood up, my chair screeching against the floor. "I'm not crazy," I shouted. "She's been hitting on me for 3 weeks. The texts, the touching, the secret meetings. I'm not making this up." Dead silence. Ronalda's mom's eyes filled with tears. Ronalda looked at me like I'd just slapped her across the face. The whole family sat frozen. Then her dad started slow clapping. "You passed, son. Most guys give up or get violent by week 2. My brain short-circuited. The entire family started nodding and smiling. Ronalda's mom wiped her fake tears and came around the table to hug me. "Welcome to the family officially," she said, patting my back like nothing happened. "Wait, what?" I pulled away, looking at Ronalda, who was now smiling too. "It's our pressure test," she explained, way too casually. "Every boyfriend goes through it. We need to know you can handle intense situations without losing control or running away." The mom cheerfully started serving dessert, like she hadn't been digitally harassing me for over a month. I was particularly proud of the deleted messages trick. "And your storage filling up. That's new tech my nephew showed me." "That's funny," I said, opening my recording app. "Because I've had this the whole time." I hit play. But instead of her mom's voice coming through the speakers, it was something else entirely. Something I'd found while trying to recover those deleted messages. Ronalda's face went white. Her dad stopped clapping. The speakers crackled and a man's voice filled the room, but it wasn't talking about my chest size or yoga classes. Her dad's voice came through crystal clear, discussing wire transfers with someone named Joseph, throwing around account numbers and talking about moving money offshore. The whole family went completely still, like someone had hit pause on them. I watched Ronalda's face change from confused to scared in maybe 2 seconds, her eyes getting wide as she realized what she was hearing. Her mom's hand froze halfway to her mouth, and her brother's fork clattered onto his plate. The recording kept playing, her dad's voice saying something about quarterly transfers and keeping the accounts separate, and I saw her mom shoot her husband this look of pure panic. Her dad moved so fast I barely saw it coming, lunging across the table and reaching for my laptop with both hands. I slammed it shut and pulled it against my chest, the recording cutting off mid-sentence. The room exploded into noise, everyone talking over each other. Her mom saying something about turning it off, her brother demanding to know where I got that, her sister just repeating, "Oh my God," over and over. Her dad's face had gone from friendly to something else entirely, something hard and calculating that made my stomach twist. I started backing toward the door, clutching the laptop so tight my fingers hurt. Ronalda grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. She kept whispering, "Please don't, please don't, please don't," like a broken record. I looked at her and realized she knew something was wrong with her family. Maybe not the specifics, but she knew something wasn't right, and they'd used her to get close to me somehow. Her dad put his hands up in this calming gesture, his voice dropping to something reasonable and measured. He said I misunderstood what I heard. They could explain everything. It wasn't what it sounded like. But there was this edge underneath his words now, nothing like the guy who'd been slow clapping and welcoming me to the family 5 minutes ago. His eyes kept flicking to the laptop in my arms, calculating. I told them I was leaving and taking my laptop with me, my voice coming out steadier than I felt. Ronalda's brother stood up from the table and moved toward the door, positioning himself between me and the exit. That's when I knew for sure the whole boyfriend test story was complete garbage, made up on the spot when I played that recording. They weren't testing me. They were covering something up and I'd accidentally recorded evidence of whatever they were hiding. Ronalda looked from me to her brother and back again, and I saw the exact moment she put it together. Her family had used her, lied to her, manipulated her into thinking I was the crazy paranoid one while they ran some kind of scheme. She stepped between me and her brother, her voice shaking but firm. She told him to move, to let me leave. The look of betrayal on her face was so raw it hurt to see, like her whole world was cracking apart. Her brother started to argue, but she cut him off, telling him again to move, now. He looked at their dad, who gave this tiny shake of his head, but Ronalda grabbed her brother's arm and physically pulled him aside. I didn't wait for them to change their minds. I bolted for the door, yanked it open, and ran for my car parked at the curb. My hands shook so bad I dropped my keys twice trying to get them in the ignition, and I could see the family through the dining room window, all of them arguing with each other. Ronalda was crying, her whole body shaking, while her dad pointed at my car, and her mom tried to pull her back inside. Her brother had his phone out, probably calling someone. I finally got the key in and started the engine, pulling away from the curb so fast my tires squealed. I drove straight across town to Nolan's apartment, running 2 red lights and not caring. My best friend opened the door in sweatpants and a confused expression that changed the second he saw my face. He pulled me inside without asking questions, and that's when I realized I'd been holding my breath for like 15 minutes straight. My chest hurt and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Nolan sat me down on his couch and got me water while I tried to explain what just happened, the words tumbling out in this panicked rush. I pulled up the recording on my laptop and played it for him. We listened to it 3 times, Nolan's face getting more serious with each replay. It was definitely Ronalda's dad talking about moving money between offshore accounts, mentioning quarterly transfers, and keeping things separate from the main business. Then near the end, he said something about someone being taken care of, and the way he said it sounded really bad, like movie villain bad. Nolan wanted to call the police right away, already reaching for his phone. But I grabbed his arm and stopped him because I was panicking about what I'd actually found and whether Ronalda was safe with her family right now. My phone started buzzing nonstop in my pocket, the screen lighting up with call after call from Ronalda, and I just stared at it, not knowing if I should answer or what I would even say if I did. The phone buzzed again in my hand, and Nolan nodded at me like I should pick up. I hit answer and put it on speaker because my hands were shaking too much to hold it steady. Ronalda's voice came through all broken up and crying, saying she was at some gas station off Highway 9 and couldn't go back home. She kept asking me to meet her somewhere with people around, swearing over and over that she had no idea what her family was actually doing. I could hear cars in the background, and her voice was doing that thing where you're trying not to completely lose it in public. Nolan grabbed his keys before I even said anything, and we were out the door in like 30 seconds. He drove while I kept Ronalda on the phone, just listening to her cry and apologize. She gave us the address of a diner near the gas station, one of those 24-hour places that's always half empty. When we got there 20 minutes later, I saw her sitting in a booth by the window, and she looked absolutely destroyed. Her mascara had run down her face in these dark streaks, and her eyes were all red and puffy. Nolan squeezed my shoulder and went to sit at the counter, close enough if I needed him but giving us space. I slid into the booth across from Ronalda, and she started apologizing again before I even sat down fully. She kept saying she was sorry for things she didn't understand until tonight, that her family had lied to her too. The waitress came over and I ordered coffee for both of us, just to have something to do with my hands. Ronalda wrapped her arms around herself like she was cold, even though the diner was warm. She told me her family sat her down 2 weeks ago, right after I started acting all paranoid and jumpy around them. They explained this whole boyfriend pressure test thing, said every guy who wanted to marry into the family had to go through it. They convinced her I was having some kind of stress breakdown from work, and the test would prove whether I really loved her enough to stick around when things got hard. She thought it was weird and kind of cruel, but her parents made it sound so normal, like this was just what their family did. Her mom really had been inappropriate with me. Ronalda admitted that now, but her family framed it as part of checking my loyalty. They told her the touching and the text were carefully planned to see if I would stay faithful, or run away, or get violent. She kept wiping at her face with napkins from the dispenser on the table. I asked her about the recording, about what her dad was discussing with that Joseph person. Her face went completely blank and confused. She had no idea what I was talking about. She knew her parents had money, always thought her dad worked in commercial real estate doing property development. Nothing about offshore accounts or making people disappear or any of that stuff on the recording. The coffee came and neither of us touched it. Ronalda started talking faster, like everything was pouring out now that she'd started. She said her family had been acting strange for the past 6 months, having these private meetings in her dad's office with the door closed. They'd take calls and walk into other rooms, speaking in low voices. Her brother had moved back home suddenly after living in California for 3 years, and she thought it was because of a bad breakup, but now that seemed suspicious. There were people coming by the house she'd never seen before, businessmen in suits who her dad would meet with in the study. Her parents started traveling more, taking random trips and being vague about where they were going. We sat in that diner booth until past 3 a.m., the place almost empty except for one truck driver and a couple of teenagers in another corner. Ronalda was scared her family might be involved in something actually illegal, not just the messed up pressure test thing. I was trying to process that the gaslighting was real, but for completely different reasons than I thought. They didn't torture me to test our relationship. They did it because I was getting too close to something they needed to hide. Nolan came over when the waitress started giving us looks about taking up the booth for so long. He sat down next to me and suggested we talk to a lawyer before going to the police. He said we needed to understand what we actually had on that recording and what it meant legally. He knew someone from college who handled white-collar crime cases, some guy who'd gone into corporate law. Ronalda looked terrified at the word lawyer, like that made everything more real. But she nodded because we couldn't just sit in this diner forever pretending none of this was happening. The next morning, I called in sick to work, my voice still shaky when I talked to my boss. Ronalda did the same with her job. Nolan had already texted his lawyer friend and got us an appointment for 10 a.m. at his office downtown. We met Sebastian Cordova in this tall building with glass windows and fancy furniture in the waiting room. He was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, wearing a suit but with his tie loosened. His office had law books on shelves and framed degrees on the wall. I pulled out my laptop and played him the recording while he listened with his fingers pressed together in front of his face. He didn't interrupt once, just let the whole thing play through. When it finished, he asked if he could hear it again, and I played it 2 more times. Then he started asking questions about Ronalda's family, what her dad's business actually was, if we'd noticed any unusual financial activity or strange behavior. He wrote notes on a legal pad in handwriting I couldn't read. Ronalda told him about the private meetings and her brother moving home and the mysterious trips. Sebastian asked specifically about the timeline when they started telling her about the pressure test story. He wanted to know exact dates if we could remember them. His face stayed neutral but professional the whole time, not giving away what he was thinking. Sebastian leaned back in his chair and tapped his pen against the legal pad a few times before speaking. He said the recording could be evidence of serious financial crimes like money laundering or fraud, maybe even worse depending on what else the investigation turned up. But then he warned us that going to the police or FBI put both Ronalda and me in a weird legal spot because I'd recorded the conversation without anyone's permission. He explained that in our state, you need consent from all parties to record a private conversation, and what I'd done might not be admissible in court. Worse, it could get me in trouble for illegal wiretapping, even though I'd stumbled onto it by accident while trying to recover those deleted messages. Ronalda's phone started buzzing on the table between us, the screen lighting up over and over. Her dad's name flashed first with a text saying they needed to talk right away. It was urgent. Then her mom sent 3 messages in a row apologizing for the pressure test going too far and saying she never meant to hurt anyone. Her brother's texts asked where she was and if she was okay, saying the whole family was worried about her. The phone kept vibrating against the wood surface, and Ronalda just stared at it like it might explode. Sebastian reached across and turned the phone face down, then told us very clearly not to respond to any family members yet. He said we definitely shouldn't go near them alone, not until he could consult with a colleague who specialized in financial crimes and white-collar cases. He needed to understand exactly what we were dealing with before we made any decisions about next steps. He asked if we had somewhere safe to stay tonight, somewhere the family wouldn't think to look for us. I told him I'd go back to Nolan's place because I couldn't face our apartment, knowing Ronalda's mom still had a spare key to get in whenever she wanted. Ronalda said she'd check into a hotel, and Sebastian immediately told her to use cash only. No credit cards that her family might be able to track somehow. She looked pale when he said that, like the reality of the situation was finally hitting her. We left his office around noon and split up on the sidewalk outside the building. Ronalda went to find a hotel while I drove to Nolan's apartment across town, my hands shaking on the steering wheel the whole way. Nolan was home working remotely and let me in without asking questions, just pointed to his couch and said I could crash as long as I needed. I sat there refreshing my email every few minutes, waiting to hear back from Sebastian. That afternoon around 4, my phone rang with Sebastian's number. I answered on the first ring, and he said his colleague had reviewed the recording and done some research. The account numbers mentioned in the conversation matched ones connected to a federal investigation into real estate fraud from about 2 years ago. There was also a name referenced in the recording, someone called Joseph, who was apparently a person of interest in that same investigation. Sebastian's voice got more serious as he explained what his colleague thought was happening. Ronalda's family might be involved in a mortgage fraud scheme where they bought and flipped properties using fake buyers and inflated appraisals to fool the banks. The offshore accounts mentioned in the recording suggested they were hiding money from the IRS, moving it around to avoid taxes and make it harder to trace. His colleague estimated they could be talking about millions of dollars based on the account numbers and transaction amounts referenced in that conversation. Sebastian said we had a decision to make, and he wanted us to think carefully before choosing. We could either go to the FBI with the recording and potentially help them build a case against Ronalda's family, or we could stay completely out of it and pretend we never heard anything. But he warned that if the family knew I had this recording, staying silent might not actually keep us safe. They might see us as a threat that needed to be dealt with somehow. I was still processing all of this when my phone buzzed with a call from Ronalda. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her at first. She said her family had somehow found her hotel and showed up in the lobby about 20 minutes ago. They didn't threaten her or make a scene, just insisted she come home with them so they could all talk and work this out as a family. She'd locked herself in her room and told the front desk not to let anyone up, but she was scared about how they'd tracked her down when she'd paid cash and used a fake name at check-in. I put her on speaker so Sebastian could hear, and he immediately said this confirmed the family was tracking her somehow. He told her to turn off her phone completely right now, not just airplane mode, but actually powered off. He said she needed to leave that hotel immediately and go somewhere they couldn't predict. Maybe Nolan's place with me or another friend's house they didn't know about. Ronalda's voice was shaking as she agreed and said she'd pack up and leave in the next 5 minutes. After we hung up, I sat on Nolan's couch feeling like my brain was short-circuiting from information overload. My phone buzzed again, and I nearly jumped out of my skin before seeing it was just a text from Mackenzie at work. She was asking if I was okay because my boss had noticed my sudden absence and was getting worried about me. I stared at that message and realized I couldn't just hide at Nolan's place forever pretending none of this was happening. Eventually, I'd have to go back to work, back to normal life, and I had no idea what happened when Ronalda's family was still out there knowing I had evidence that could send them to prison. Ronalda showed up at Nolan's door about 30 minutes later with a backpack and red eyes from crying. She didn't say anything when I opened the door, just walked past me and sat on the couch looking completely drained. Nolan made coffee for all 3 of us, and we sat there in his living room until almost 2 in the morning talking through everything that had happened. I kept playing parts of the recording on my laptop, listening to her dad's voice discussing wire transfers and account numbers with this Joseph person. Ronalda couldn't stop shaking her head like she was trying to make it all make sense, but couldn't. Nolan asked the practical questions about what we should do next and whether her family would actually try to hurt us or just wanted to scare us into staying quiet. I didn't have good answers because I honestly had no idea what we were dealing with or how dangerous these people actually were. The recording kept playing in my head even after we turned off the laptop, those words about moving money and taking care of problems looping over and over until I felt sick. We finally went to sleep around 3, Ronalda on the couch and me on an air mattress on Nolan's floor. But I barely slept because every sound made me think her family had found us. My phone buzzed at 7 in the morning, and I nearly jumped out of my skin before seeing it was Sebastian calling. His voice sounded different from yesterday, more urgent and focused. He told me his colleague had contacted a federal prosecutor he'd worked with before on financial crimes cases. The prosecutor listened to a copy of my recording and was extremely interested in talking to us as soon as possible. But Sebastian warned that meeting with federal prosecutors meant we were potentially agreeing to testify in court if this went to trial. I put him on speaker so Ronalda could hear and watched her face go pale when he explained what cooperation with federal authorities would actually mean. She started crying before he even finished talking, these quiet tears that just rolled down her face while she stared at the floor. I thanked Sebastian and told him we'd call him back after talking it through, then hung up and moved to sit next to Ronalda on the couch. She completely broke down then, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. She kept saying she couldn't testify against her family, that she loved them even though they'd done terrible things, that the idea of sending her own parents and brother to prison made her physically sick. I held her while she cried and felt completely torn between wanting to protect her and knowing we had evidence of serious crimes that hurt other people. Part of me wanted to just delete the recording and pretend we never heard it, but I knew that was wrong and probably wouldn't even keep us safe at this point. After about an hour, Ronalda calmed down enough to talk and said she wanted to at least meet with the prosecutor to understand what we were really dealing with. I called Sebastian back and he set up a meeting for that afternoon at the Federal Building downtown. We got ready in silence, both of us moving like we were underwater, and Nolan drove us there because neither of us felt steady enough to drive. The prosecutor's office was on the 8th floor, and we had to go through security screening that made everything feel way too real. The prosecutor turned out to be this serious woman in her 40s who introduced herself and got right down to business. She listened to my recording twice, taking notes the whole time, then started asking really specific questions about Ronalda's family's business operations and properties they owned. Ronalda answered what she could, but admitted she didn't know much about her dad's work, beyond that he supposedly did commercial real estate deals. The prosecutor nodded like she expected that answer and told us she could confirm what Sebastian had mentioned about an ongoing investigation. She explained that Ronalda's family had been under federal surveillance for the past 8 months as part of a much larger case. They weren't working alone, but were part of a whole network of families running fraud schemes together. The prosecutor said they'd stolen millions of dollars from banks and private investors through fake property deals where they'd use fake buyers and inflated appraisals to get loans they never intended to pay back. She pulled out a folder with documents showing properties Ronalda's family supposedly owned and transaction records that proved the fraud. Ronalda stared at the papers like they were written in another language, and I could see her trying to process that her entire childhood was built on stolen money. The prosecutor looked at Ronalda and told her directly that she wasn't implicated in any criminal activity based on their investigation. She said my recording put me in the middle of a federal case whether I wanted to be there or not, but I also wasn't suspected of any crimes. Then she explained that Ronalda's cooperation would be really valuable because she could testify about her family's lifestyle, sudden wealth increases, and any suspicious behavior she'd noticed over the years. Ronalda asked in this small voice if there was any way her family could avoid prison if they cooperated with the investigation. The prosecutor was honest that the evidence against them was already strong, even without my recording, so cooperation might reduce their sentences, but wouldn't eliminate prison time completely. She said the fraud was too extensive and had hurt too many people for anyone to walk away without serious consequences. We left the prosecutor's office about an hour later and walked to Nolan's car in complete silence. Ronalda didn't say a single word during the drive back to Nolan's apartment or for several hours after we got there. She just sat on the couch staring at nothing while I sat next to her, not knowing what to say or do. I knew she was processing that her entire family was going to prison and everything she thought she knew about her childhood was a lie built on crimes that destroyed other families. That night after Nolan went to bed, Ronalda finally spoke and told me she needed to warn her family that the feds were coming for them. The prosecutor had told us explicitly not to make any contact with her family, but Ronalda said she felt like she owed them a chance to prepare themselves, or maybe even run. I understood why she felt conflicted because these were still her parents and brother despite everything they'd done, but I reminded her that her family had gaslit me for weeks and made me think I was losing my mind. They'd used her as an unwitting accomplice in their scheme and manipulated both of us without caring how it affected our relationship or mental health. I told her that warning them now could make us accessories after the fact and put us in legal danger too. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and asked how I could be so cold about sending her family to prison. I told her I wasn't being cold about it. I was trying to protect both of us from getting dragged into their mess even deeper than we already were. She stood up from Nolan's couch and paced to the window, arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold herself together. I could see her shoulders shaking and knew she was crying again, but when she turned back to face me, her expression had changed from sad to something harder. She said her family raised her, fed her, paid for her college, and now I expected her to just turn her back on them without even giving them a chance to explain or prepare. I reminded her that the prosecutor explicitly told us the investigation had been going on for 8 months, which meant her family knew they were in trouble and chose to keep manipulating us anyway, instead of coming clean. Ronalda sat back down but wouldn't look at me, just stared at her hands in her lap. She admitted she felt torn between loyalty to her family and knowing what they did was wrong, but the idea of being the reason they went to prison made her feel sick. I moved closer and took her hand, telling her she wasn't the reason they were going to prison. Their own crimes were the reason. We sat there in Nolan's living room until almost midnight, going in circles about family loyalty versus doing what was right. She kept saying things like they were still her parents, and she couldn't just abandon them, while I kept pointing out that they'd abandoned any right to her loyalty when they used her as a pawn in their criminal scheme. Eventually, Nolan came out of his bedroom in his pajamas and made us both tea, sitting with us while we hashed it out. He told Ronalda that he understood family loyalty, but reminded her that her family had been willing to destroy her relationship and my mental health to protect themselves. That seemed to hit her harder than anything I'd said, and she finally nodded and agreed not to warn them. The next morning, my phone rang at 6:30, and I saw it was the prosecutor calling. She told me to turn on the news, and I grabbed the remote while Ronaldo stumbled out of Nolan's guest room looking confused. The local news was showing live footage of FBI agents in windbreakers executing search warrants at a big house I recognized as Ronaldo's family home. Ronaldo gasped and grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging in as we watched agents carrying boxes out of the house. The news anchor was saying something about a major real estate fraud investigation, and then the camera cut to another location showing more agents at an office building downtown. Ronaldo's dad was led out in handcuffs, his face blank like he'd known this was coming. The prosecutor called back an hour later to give us more details, explaining that they'd arrested her dad and 2 uncles so far, with more arrests coming throughout the week. Ronaldo sat frozen on the couch watching the news coverage loop the same footage over and over, showing her childhood home swarming with federal agents. Over the next week, it felt like watching dominoes fall. Her mom got arrested on Tuesday, let out of a yoga studio in handcuffs while other students stared. Her brother got picked up on Thursday morning at his apartment. 2 more uncles I'd only met once got arrested on Friday. The charges kept piling up with each arrest: conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, bank fraud, making false statements to financial institutions. The news kept calling it one of the largest real estate fraud schemes in state history, saying the family and their associates had stolen millions through fake property deals and inflated appraisals. I saw our apartment building on TV during one news segment, and reporters were trying to interview neighbors about Ronaldo's family. One neighbor told the camera that the family always seemed to have money, but nobody knew exactly what the dad did for work. Another neighbor said the mom drove a Mercedes and wore designer clothes, but claimed to be a stay-at-home parent. Ronaldo couldn't watch the coverage anymore after the 3rd day, just stayed in Nolan's guest room with the door closed. I brought her food, but she barely touched it, and I started getting seriously worried about her mental state. Nolan suggested we move her stuff from our apartment to his place temporarily, because media was camped outside our building trying to get interviews with anyone connected to the family. We waited until late at night and snuck in through the back entrance, grabbing clothes and essentials while trying to avoid the 2 reporters still hanging around the front. Ronaldo moved like a robot, just going through the motions without really being present. Back at Nolan's place, she curled up on the couch and stared at nothing, not eating, barely sleeping, completely shut down. I sat with her every night, sometimes talking, sometimes just being there while she processed everything. She'd lost her entire family in 1 week, not to death but to federal prison, which somehow felt worse because they'd chosen this path. Sebastian called to say the prosecutor wanted to meet with both of us about potential testimony. He explained that they wanted me to testify about how I obtained the recording and what I witnessed at the family dinner when her dad revealed the pressure test story. They also wanted Ronaldo to testify about her family's lifestyle, any suspicious activities she'd noticed over the years, sudden increases in wealth, anything that could help establish the pattern of criminal behavior. Ronaldo looked terrified at the idea of testifying against her family, but Sebastian was gentle, explaining that her testimony could actually help other victims get justice. We spent the next few days at Sebastian's office going over potential questions and preparing for what testimony might look like. The prosecutor was particularly interested in when Ronaldo first noticed her family having more money, any conversations she'd overheard about properties or deals, times when her parents seemed stressed or secretive. Ronaldo remembered her dad taking a lot of private phone calls starting about 3 years ago, always stepping outside or into another room. She remembered her mom suddenly having expensive jewelry and designer bags around the same time. She remembered her brother moving back home last year, claiming he needed to help with the family business, but she'd never understood what that meant. Then Sebastian got a call from the prosecutor's office saying Ronaldo's family was trying to contact her through their lawyers. They wanted her to claim the pressure test story was real and that I'd misunderstood the recording I'd captured. They were trying to create reasonable doubt by suggesting the whole thing was an elaborate family test that went wrong, and I'd recorded an innocent conversation about legitimate business dealings. The lawyers had drafted a statement for Ronaldo to sign, saying her family would never be involved in criminal activity, and the pressure test was a long-standing family tradition to vet potential family members. Ronaldo read the statement her family's lawyers sent, and I watched her face go through about 10 different emotions. She crumpled the paper and threw it across Sebastian's office, finally getting angry instead of just sad. She said she was done protecting people who'd been willing to gaslight her boyfriend for weeks and use her as cover for their crimes. She told Sebastian to tell their lawyers she wouldn't be signing anything or lying for them in court. That night, she talked to me for the first time in days, really talked, about how betrayed she felt. She said the hardest part wasn't even that they'd committed crimes. It was that they'd looked her in the eye and made her think I was crazy, made her question the person she loved, all to protect themselves. She'd spent weeks thinking I needed mental help when really her family was just covering their tracks. Over the next month, more details kept coming out as the prosecution built their case. News reports said the fraud scheme had been running for at least 5 years, maybe longer. Her family and a network of associates had created fake buyers, inflated property values, taken out fraudulent mortgages, and then let the properties go into foreclosure while pocketing the loan money. They'd stolen over $12 million from banks and investors, Dozens of families had lost their homes because of the fake mortgages and property flips that drove up neighborhood prices. Ronaldo started reading victim impact statements that were being submitted to the court, stories from people who'd lost everything because of what her family did. One family had their home foreclosed on after property values in their neighborhood got artificially inflated by her family's fake deals, pricing them out when they tried to refinance. Another family had their life savings wiped out investing in a property development that turned out to be completely fraudulent. A retired couple lost their retirement home in a foreclosure scheme her family orchestrated. Reading those statements changed something in Ronaldo, and I watched her transform from a conflicted daughter into someone who wanted to help make this right. She called the prosecutor's office and volunteered to testify for the prosecution. No immunity deal needed, no conditions, just willing to tell the truth about everything she'd seen and heard growing up in that family. The trial started 3 weeks later in a federal courthouse downtown. I sat in the witness box on the first day, looking out at rows of people I didn't know, reporters with notebooks and Ronaldo sitting next to Sebastian in the gallery. The prosecutor asked me to explain how I got the recording, and I walked through the whole pressure test situation, how her family made me think I was losing my mind for weeks. The defense lawyer came at me hard during cross-examination, asking if I had a history of paranoia or anxiety disorders. He suggested I misunderstood innocent family behavior because I was stressed from work. He tried to make it sound like I recorded a private conversation because I was mentally unstable and looking for evidence of something that wasn't there. But then the prosecutor played the actual recording for the jury, and you could hear Ronaldo's dad clear as day discussing account numbers and wire transfers and someone being taken care of. The defense lawyer's face went tight when the recording ended, and he had no more questions for me. I stepped down from the witness stand feeling like I'd been through a fight, my shirt soaked with sweat even though the courtroom was cold. Ronaldo testified 2 days later, and I watched her walk to the witness box in a simple blue dress, her hands steady even though I knew she was breaking apart inside. She answered every question calmly, explaining how her family's lifestyle changed about 5 years ago when they suddenly had money for expensive vacations and new cars. She told the jury about private meetings her parents held in their home office with the door locked, how her brother moved back from California without explanation last year. The prosecutor asked if she knew about her family's criminal activities, and she said no clearly, her voice never shaking. She explained that she trusted her family completely until the night I played that recording at dinner. I watched her face as she testified, saw the way she kept her emotions locked down tight, and I was proud of her even though I knew this was destroying her. The defense tried to suggest she was lying to protect me, that we'd made up the pressure test story together to cover up my paranoid recording. Ronaldo looked the lawyer right in the eye and said her family had gaslit both of us, used her as an unwitting tool in their cover-up, and she was done protecting people who'd manipulated her that way. The trial dragged on for 6 weeks with witness after witness. The FBI brought in financial experts who traced the money through shell companies and offshore accounts. Other victims testified about losing their homes in foreclosure schemes her family orchestrated. A retired couple talked about their life savings disappearing in a fake property development. The evidence piled up day after day until there was no doubt about what her family had done or how many people they'd hurt. My recording was just one piece of a massive conspiracy that had been running for years. The jury deliberated for 2 days, and when they came back with guilty verdicts on all counts for all 5 family members, Ronaldo grabbed my hand so hard her nails dug into my palm. The judge scheduled sentencing for 2 months later, and we walked out of that courthouse into a crowd of reporters shouting questions. Ronaldo was quiet on the drive home, staring out the window, and I knew she was processing that her entire family was going to prison because of crimes they'd committed over years while she lived in their house completely unaware. The sentencing hearing happened on a cold morning in January. We sat in the same courtroom, but this time Ronaldo's family was there in orange jumpsuits, looking smaller somehow than they had during the trial. The judge went through each family member one by one, reading out their crimes and the damage they'd caused. He gave Ronaldo's parents 12 years each in federal prison, calling their actions a betrayal of public trust that destroyed innocent families and corrupted the real estate market. Her brother got 8 years because he'd been involved for a shorter time. The 2 uncles each got 10 years for their roles in the conspiracy. The judge's voice was hard when he talked about how they'd shown no remorse, how they'd tried to manipulate the legal system even after being caught. Ronaldo sat frozen next to me through all of it, barely breathing, and I kept my arm around her shoulders. When the marshals started leading her mom away in handcuffs, Ronaldo made this sound like something broke inside her chest. She stood up without meaning to, and I caught her before she fell. We ended up in the courthouse hallway with her sobbing against my shoulder while people walked past us. She kept saying she knew they deserved it. She knew what they'd done was terrible, but watching them get taken away to prison was harder than anything she'd imagined. I held her and didn't try to make it better because there was nothing I could say that would help. Her family had committed serious crimes and hurt a lot of people, and now they were paying for it. But that didn't make it easier for her to watch them disappear into the prison system for the next decade. The media attention started fading after about a month. Reporters stopped camping outside our building, and the news moved on to other stories. We finally went back to our apartment after Sebastian helped us change all the locks and make sure Ronaldo's family had no way to access our space anymore. Walking back into our home felt strange, like we were different people than the ones who'd lived there before all this happened. Ronalda spent the first week just cleaning everything, scrubbing surfaces that were already clean, like she could wash away what her family had done if she tried hard enough. She started seeing a therapist twice a week, someone who specialized in family trauma and betrayal. Her therapist helped her work through the guilt she felt about not knowing what her family was doing, about being used as a tool in their manipulation of me. Ronalda came home from sessions exhausted, but slowly she started accepting that she was a victim too, that her family had lied to her just as much as they'd lied to everyone else. She'd trusted the people who raised her, and they'd used that trust to hurt other people while keeping her in the dark. I kept going to my own therapist to deal with the paranoia that still hit me sometimes. I'd be at work and suddenly convince myself that something wasn't real, that I was missing some obvious truth everyone else could see. My therapist helped me rebuild trust in my own perceptions, worked with me on recognizing the difference between justified caution and the trauma response her family had created in me. We talked about the anger I still felt toward them for making me question my sanity, for putting Ronalda in the middle of their crimes, for destroying so many lives just to steal money. Some days were better than others, but I was learning to live with what had happened instead of letting it control me. Nolan became like family to both of us through all of it. We had dinner at his place every Wednesday night, and he'd cook these elaborate meals while telling stories that made us laugh for the first time in weeks. He joked that he'd earned honorary brother status through crisis management, that most friends don't have to help you survive federal investigations and family arrests. But the truth was, he'd been there when we needed someone, had let us crash at his place, and never made us feel like a burden. Ronalda started calling him her brother by choice, and Nolan pretended to be annoyed, but I could tell he was happy about it. We were building something new, a family made of people who chose each other instead of being stuck with blood relations that turned out to be criminals. Going back to work after everything felt weird at first, like everyone knew what happened and was watching me. Mackenzie from accounting started sitting with me at lunch, not asking questions about the trial but just talking about normal stuff like her cat and the new coffee shop downtown. She'd been the one who covered some of my projects when I was gone for court dates, and she never made me feel bad about it or asked for details I didn't want to share. Over the next few weeks, she helped me catch up on everything I'd missed, staying late to walk me through the new client management system and forwarding me emails that explained office changes. When people in the break room would get quiet as I walked in, Mackenzie would just start talking louder about something completely random until the awkwardness passed. She became the kind of friend I didn't know I needed, someone who helped me feel normal again instead of like the guy whose girlfriend's family went to prison. We started getting coffee before work, and she'd tell me about her dating disasters, which somehow made my own life feel less insane by comparison. She never treated me like I was fragile or broken, just like I was her coworker and friend who'd been through something tough. 6 months after the sentencing, Ronalda and I were sitting on our couch eating takeout, and I realized we were actually okay. Not perfect, not like nothing had happened, but genuinely okay in a way I hadn't expected after everything. We'd been through something that would have destroyed most relationships, watching her entire family get arrested and testifying in federal court, and dealing with reporters camping outside our building. But we chose each other every single day, even when it would have been easier to walk away and start over with someone who didn't come with all that baggage. Ronalda was different now, more careful about trust, but also more sure of herself in ways she hadn't been before. She didn't apologize for her family anymore because she'd accepted that their choices weren't her responsibility. We had date nights where we didn't talk about the trial or her family or any of it, just watched movies and argued about pizza toppings like regular people. The therapist had told us that trauma either breaks couples apart or makes them stronger, and somehow we'd ended up in the second category. A letter came for Ronalda from some group called the Family Justice Network, asking if she'd be interested in volunteering with other people whose relatives had committed white-collar crimes. She stared at that letter for 3 days before finally calling them back. They paired her with a woman whose husband had run a Ponzi scheme, and Ronalda started meeting with her once a week at a coffee shop to just listen and share her own experience. She came home from those meetings exhausted but also lighter somehow, like helping someone else process their family's crimes was helping her process her own. The organization asked her to speak on a panel about being the family member left behind after financial crimes, and she said yes, even though public speaking scared her. I watched her stand up in front of 30 people and talk about the guilt and shame and anger she felt when she found out what her family had done. She told them about feeling like she should have known, should have seen the signs, and how she had to learn that being lied to didn't make her stupid or complicit. After the panel, 5 different people came up to her crying and thanking her for putting words to what they were feeling. She started volunteering every week, running support groups and helping people navigate the legal system and just being there for families who felt completely alone. My boss called me into his office on a random Tuesday, and I thought I was getting fired. Instead, he told me he was promoting me to senior account manager, saying he'd watched how I handled pressure during the trial and media attention, and knew I could handle anything the job threw at me. The promotion came with a decent raise in my own office, which felt surreal after spending months thinking my career was over because of the scandal. He said most people would have fallen apart or quit, but I'd kept showing up and doing good work even when my personal life was a nightmare. I thanked him and went back to my desk where Mackenzie was waiting with a cupcake she'd bought from the bakery downstairs. She'd somehow known about the promotion before I did because she was friends with the boss's assistant. That night, Ronaldo and I celebrated at the nice restaurant downtown, the one we'd been to on our first anniversary back when I had no idea her family was running a $12 million fraud scheme. I realized sitting there that I was actually proud of myself for getting through everything, for not breaking even when I felt like I was losing my mind. The whole experience had sucked in ways I couldn't fully describe, but it taught me I was tougher than I thought. We started talking about moving to a new city a few weeks after my promotion. Every time we left the apartment, we'd see places that reminded us of her family, or the trial, and the local news still occasionally ran stories about the fraud case. Ronaldo had been looking at graduate programs in social work, wanting to turn everything she'd learned into a career helping people. She got accepted to a program in a city 4 hours away, one where nobody knew our names or our story. We spent weekends driving there to look at apartments, walking through neighborhoods and imagining what it would be like to start completely fresh. I applied for jobs and got 3 interviews in 2 weeks, finally accepting an offer at a company that had no idea about my past. We gave notice at our jobs and our apartment, started packing up 3 years of life into boxes. Ronaldo donated most of her furniture because it had been gifts from her family, and she didn't want the reminders. We kept only what we'd bought together, the things that were ours and not connected to people who were now in federal prison. The decision to move felt like choosing ourselves and our future over the weight of everything that had happened. Nolan threw us a goodbye party on our last Saturday in town, ordering too much pizza, and setting up his apartment with decorations that said things like new adventures and fresh starts. Sebastian showed up with expensive wine and spent an hour telling lawyer stories that made everyone laugh. Mackenzie brought her boyfriend and gave me a card signed by everyone at work, including my boss who wrote that I'd be missed. The federal prosecutor even stopped by for 20 minutes, which was weird but also kind of nice. She told Ronaldo she was proud of how brave she'd been throughout the trial, that testifying against family took more courage than most people had. We all stood around Nolan's living room eating and talking, and I looked around realizing these people had become family in a way that mattered more than blood. They'd shown up when things were terrible, had supported us through the worst months of our lives without asking for anything back. Nolan made a toast about how crisis shows you who your real friends are, and how he was glad the whole nightmare had brought us all closer together, even though he wished we'd met under better circumstances. We stayed until almost midnight, not wanting the night to end because it felt like closing a chapter we weren't quite ready to finish. Ronaldo and I got married 3 days before the moving truck came, just a quick ceremony at the courthouse with Nolan as our witness. We'd talked about having a big wedding someday, but decided we didn't want to wait. Didn't want our marriage to be about her family's absence or making some big statement. It was just us and Nolan and 2 friends from my work, standing in front of a judge who had no idea about our story. Ronaldo wore a simple blue dress she'd bought the day before, and I wore the same suit I'd worn to testify at her family's trial. The judge asked if we'd written our own vows, and we said no, just did the traditional ones about sickness and health and better or worse. We'd already been through the worst part, had chosen each other when it would have been easier to walk away, so the vows felt like just making official what we'd already proven. Nolan took photos on his phone, and we all went to lunch at the diner where Ronaldo and I had sat up until 3 a.m. that first night after playing the recording. Her family wasn't there, and never would be at any of our future celebrations, but she'd made peace with building a family based on choice instead of obligation. We were creating something new together, something that belonged only to us. Our new city felt different from the first day we arrived. Nobody recognized us at the grocery store or the coffee shop or anywhere we went. I started my new job and introduced myself without the weight of everyone knowing my story, just as a guy who'd moved for his wife's grad school program. Ronaldo began her classes and came home excited about theories of family systems and crisis intervention, finding purpose in studying how to help people through trauma. We both still had hard days where the memories hit us wrong, where I'd get paranoid about someone's intentions, or she'd cry about missing her mom despite everything. My therapist had warned us that healing wasn't linear, that we'd have setbacks and triggers and moments where it felt like we hadn't made any progress at all. But most days were good. We're about building a life based on honesty and trust, instead of secrets and manipulation. We made new friends who knew us as we were now, not as the couple from that fraud trial. Ronaldo joked one night while we were unpacking the last boxes that I'd passed the real relationship test, the one her family never intended when they started their pressure test scheme. We'd survived something that should have destroyed us and come out stronger, more sure of each other than ever. Our apartment filled up with new furniture and new memories, things that belonged only to us in this life we were building together.